Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Phantasmagorium Show's review of Thor: Love and Thunder. I'm your host, Steve Foley, and I'm joined today by Kat. Hi, Kat.
Hey, Steve.
How you doing?
Good.
How did you like, just without getting way too involved? How did you like the movie?
It was okay. Kind of the effort I would expect from the fourth film in a franchise.
Right.
Not great.
Right. I'll say that the same. I liked it, didn't love it, but I think what we'll do, the way we'll structure the shows, we'll go, Kat will go scene by scene, and then we'll talk about our pros and cons of each of those scenes instead of kind of giving you a rundown up front. I think that'll will flow, make the show flow a little better there, and then we'll take your questions and fire those in. If you want to get a question in, you can do it two ways. Obviously, you can do chat through YouTube. You can also send us a tip if you want to, and put your comment or question there. www.streamelements.com/phantasmagorium show/tip. Cool. All right. With that little stuff out of the way, Tony. Oh, by the way, Tony might be popping in and out. He just popped in, but then popped out. So if he does come on, we'll bring him on, get his thoughts about it as well. But for now, let's, if you don't mind, let's jump in and get the ball rolling. Oh, by the way, before we start, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I can't remember. It's been 20 some odd movies, 24, 25, I think. I think this might be the best MCU cold open.
Yes, I agree 100%.
Yeah. Okay. It blew me away. I was like, this is, I was sitting there thinking, this is probably the best cold open the MCU's ever done.
Yeah, and that's where the perfect place to jump in here. It's like, not only it's the best cold open in the MCU, it's the best sequence, period, in all of Phase 4, and it's easily the best scene in Taika's 2 Thor films. Done. And I love that. So it begins, and by cold open, where the logos haven't even popped up yet. So we find Gore is in the desert, played by Christian Bale. He's cradling his daughter. You could tell they're dying of dehydration. And he's praying to the gods, the god Rapu, to save her life. And he's pleading for it. And then there's a couple crossfades, and she dies, and he buries her, and he's devastated. And then he hears this very seductive female voice, disembodied voice coming across the desert. So he wanders off in the dunes. There's a couple more crossfades, and he comes upon an oasis. And at first I thought this was a mirage, because it just kind of it seemed like it kind of appeared almost out of nowhere.
I felt the same way.
He starts stumbling through the jungle, falls into the water stream. And what's really great about his performance here is not only is he got a look that says he's so grateful to finally find water, but you see the pain and anguish on his face that he couldn't find this to save his daughter, And he moves through the stream, gets the water, and then comes upon some fruit, and he's feasting on it. And we see behind him there's this kind of corpse lying there with a black sword. It's like, what's going on? And then there's a god in front of him, Rapu, who's kind of looking at him and laughing and chiding him. And when Gore realizes that this is his god, he just immediately bows down and starts worshiping him. And he's like, "Oh, one of my subjects, and how great from my king to all this." And Gore responds that, I'm the last one. Everything's gone. We've all the suffering. We're all gone. And he starts talking about, the eternal paradise or whatever that they're promised at the time of death. And Rapu just mocks him for being gullible enough to believe in that stuff and says, doesn't matter that you're the last. You will be replaced by others just like you. And aside from Rapu, you see these like anthropomorphic flowers as well. In the comics, you might remember that Gore ripped the eyelids off the god of flowers so that eyes would sting and burn for all eternity. So you see, and I thought, oh, geez, something bad's about to happen. Rapu tells them that the reason they're there is because there's this guy with a necrosword, and he's trying to kill all the gods, and we stopped him. And Gore's like, well, why don't you love our subject? And he's so flabbergasted that don't like them, that he cannot believe the callousness, so he just rips his medallion off. And Rapu is upset by this, so he grabs him by the throat, raises him up in the air to start throttling him. And then we hear that seductive female voice again telling Gore to take up the sword and go slay all the gods. And then the sword disappears from next to the corpse, and it rises up out of the ground into Gore's hands, and he just impales Rapu, gets back on the ground, and he says, "So this is my vow. All gods will die." And then he swings it, and decapitates him, and they cut away off screen, and it slowly fades to black. And I'm like, Christian Bale just sells it. And I thought this was actually the way that he discovers the god in the Oasis is better than the comic where he just found two gods randomly fighting each other. Because this is like right on point because it's his god, how he was so brutally mocked and everything. Like, and Bale just selling it so well. I'm like, this is it. Immediately, you're wed to this character. Like, yes, I am on your side, Gore. You can do no wrong. And excellent sequence.
I thought so. It locks you in. I love the cold open. I didn't expect it, so I think that also had me engaged. So yeah, great sequence.
Yeah. So from there we get the Marvel logo, and we see into this montage where Korg, I don't know the name of the planet, but he's entertaining the children with stories of Thor, and it's basically a montage which serves as previously on Thor. For people who haven't caught up lately, and he goes through Thor's childhood and all the losses that he's had, and I like that immediately you're seeing the parallels between Gore and Thor in terms of loss, but they're not like beating you over the head with it, which I liked. Right. He then gets to talking about how he's been with the Guardians for a while, but he's having a midlife crisis. He doesn't know what he's going to do. He's gone from dad bod to god bod. And at one point, Korg mentions that some of the gods they're seeing have been dead. And one of the scenes shows Thor working out in this cave where there was presumably a god that was a massive giant, just a skeleton. But Korg doesn't really dwell on it. And he says, yes, now Thor he's not really into fighting anymore. And you see him plant Stormbreaker on this hillside and sit there in this cloak. And now he just waits till people to come and say, and then you hear like one of the Guardians be like, Thor, we need you. And he starts heading down the hill where you see the Guardians holding up shop, heading up a defensive line against these, what look like a bunch of evil Muppets, frankly, who've taken over this religious temple. And they're riding these like Mad Max type hover bikes coming at them. And
furry bird-like creatures.
Yeah, furry bird-like, and they're like coming at him, and the king of this kingdom comes up behind Thor and greets him, and he's like, "Oh, King Rapidan, nice to see you." And he's like, and the king is kind of impressed. He's like, "Wow, a god! We haven't seen any gods since all of our gods were murdered." Right. And Thor has a slight reaction to it, but of course, there's bigger things to deal with right now. So he turns around and he's like, he gets to his catchphrase, and he's like, "All right," and Star-Lord's like, "Dang," like mouthing it because it's about to happen, and Thor's all, "This ends here and now," and he just takes off his cloak and chucks Stormbreaker, and it just unleashes the lightning to wipe all the bikes, and he misses two of them, so he jumps in the air with his legs spread apart to catch the two bikes, and then eventually they flip over and smash into each other. And Rocket gets all upset, and he's like,
Van Damme right there.
Yeah, and he's like, Rocket's like, "You said this would be a nice relaxing vacation." He's like, "No, I said it'd be like a relaxing vacation." To which Thor then takes off with Stormbreaker towards the temple, and the king kind of whispers to his emissary, he's like, "He's not going into the temple, is he?" And he does, and he gets rid of the bad guys, and he lands back in front of the king. He's praising himself, basically, and then the whole temple collapses like a glass palace. And then you have a hard cut to them packing up to leave, and Thor's trying to apologize to the king. He's like, no, don't talk about it. It just makes me more upset. Don't, please don't. And possibly to punish Thor for this, or just as a gift, they give him these two obnoxious screaming goats, which needed more CG rendering time, I'd say. So they take the goats aboard, and then they're going to go to leave. So what did you think about this first part of the sequence?
I like it. This is where we get the Prometheus galaxy. So that's good. I like that. That whole sequence worked for me. This is where you get a sense of the tone of what this movie is going to be like. This movie actually it's a bifurcated tone. It has two tones. It has this signature Taika Waititi silly tone, and then it has a serious tone, just like Ragnarok. Right? Ragnarok had that as well. So you get that, and you get the promise that we got a little too much of, in my opinion, in the trailers of the Guardians, and we'll talk about that later. But because this is pretty much all we see of them. But on the whole, yeah, it kind of sets the tone, sets the stage for what's to come.
Yeah, so they get on the ship, and they're getting immediately frustrated by the goats not being able to tame them. Nebula wants to put them down, and Thor stops her. And then Kraglin is revealed to be on the ship. Like, "What are you doing here?" And he's on the ship with this lady, and he's like, "Well, you told me to stay and guard the ship." And they're trying to decide where they're going to go next, so they check to see what the latest distress signals are. And sort of out of the blue, there's a bunch of them about Gore the God Butcher, and it's not clear why they're only just coming in, but they are. And one of the distress messages from Lady Sif, who's pleading for Thor, and he recognizes her immediately. He's like, "Wait, go back!" And he hears that message, and for a reason I'm still not clear on, Star-Lord responds by walking out of the ship. Thor goes down there, and they start having these parting words where Thor is playing up the idea of him being the captain again, like they teased at the end of Endgame, and he's pretending like he's gifting the ship and the crew to Star-Lord, to which Star-Lord is going to humor him and let him have his fun with it before they unload the goats and unload Korg, and they unceremoniously, without even waiting for a final goodbye, just take off, and they're gone from the movie.
I do like the fact that they didn't lean back in or go back into the butting of heads between Star-Lord and Thor. Obviously, in the intervening time, they had worked that, whatever that was, out. I was hoping that they wouldn't do that and go back to that kind of weird. I didn't like it in the first place. It just kind of felt out of place for me. So I liked it in this movie. They kind of moved past that. They're working as a team, and we're as much as with a team as they can be, with Thor thinking he's in charge of everything all the time.
Yeah. But I didn't understand why the Guardians chose to abandon him at this point, because we know that the Guardians are all about family, especially in their first two movies. We know that Star-Lord is discreetly on the hunt for Gamora. And since Star-Lord saw that Lady Sif clearly means something to Thor in the moment they were there, you figure at the very least he would have accompanied them, or they would have accompanied him.
I took it as when we got the news montage, that happens in movies. And, this is happening all over the place. That they were going to split up. So Thor and Korg were going to go save Lady Sif, and then the Guardians were going to go do whatever they could in these other places.
Okay, is that what he mentioned? Yeah, because the dialogue kind of went by kind of fast and I missed it. I'm like, wait, where are they going? Because it just seemed like they're going.
Just a sayonara.
I sensed a bit of like a subtle sense of they're kind of tired of Thor. Like, because Star-Lord has that whole conversation with him where he's like, when you're feeling kind of depressed, and he even tells Thor straight up, if you feel lost to me, and when you want to, every time you're feeling lost, just think of the people you love. And Star-Lord tells him something that's going to come back later in the movie where he says, sometimes it's
definitely a hint of that, okay, this is a good time to,
right. And he tells him that, sometimes it's better to feel shitty about somebody that you've loved than it is not to have loved at all.
Yeah.
And that's when Thor does that little thing where he tries to lean into Star-Lord's field of vision before they take off. And it's like, okay, I guess Korg alluded to the notion that, he's having a midlife crisis, even though I didn't feel that as much in the performance, because we barely got any time with Thor feeling lost before he's now got his mission, and he's going to have his mission for the rest of the movie at this point. So they take off, and now Thor and the Korg and the goats are left to go find Lady Sif. But before we do that, they cut back to Earth. We see that Jane Foster's in a cancer ward. The guy sitting next to her getting chemo is this young college-age kid, and he's reading her book, and she's like, "Hey, you like the book?" It's like, "Oh, I wrote it." He's like, "Really?" It's like, "Yeah." And he's talking about how, Einstein-Rosen bridge is kind of difficult. And she just tears a page out of her own book and demonstrates a fold in space and how it works. He's like, "But you just destroyed your own book." She's like, "Yeah, but now you understand it better." It was great. And then Darcy shows up and she asks Jane, "Have you ever, it's not really going well. Have you ever thought of going to Asgard or something?" And Jane's like, "Oh, no, we'll find a way." And Darcy's like, "You're at stage 4. And Jane's like, "So what?" She's like, "There's only 4 stages." And she's like, "Oh, I'll think of a way out of it." And Darcy tries to implore to consult Asgard, but she doesn't really want to do that until she's back home in her office and she's talking to Eric Selvig. And he says he's done all he can and that it's really bad. There's nothing he can do. He's deeply sorry. And so then she looks back at these books she has on Norse mythology, starts flipping through them, and discovers that they do have, magical healing powers and such, which she should be familiar with a bit already because Thor had taken her to Asgard in the past for such things. Yeah. So she goes to New Asgard, incognito, undercover as a teen, where we see New Asgard has become a tourist trap with cruise ships and little tours on flying Viking boats. And she's in the tour group that gets to watch a play of Odin's death with Matt Damon, Sam Neill, and Luke Hemsworth reprising their roles as actor Loki, Odin, and Thor, with Melissa McCarthy playing the actress Hela and her real-life husband Ben playing the stage manager. And that was pretty funny. And, they do their all bows, and then they finally introduce, and after they've seen this, the tour guide, who I think is Daryl, because you do see him at one point. Yeah, so Daryl from the Thor shorts, for those who haven't seen them, he takes them over to the remains of Mjolnir, which is sitting on an old grass knoll under a dome. And after everybody moves on from it, she's kind of staring at it. And all of a sudden, the clouds become overcast. You hear the thunder, and then the electricity is summoning inside the dome, and it slowly starts piecing back together before it cuts to black. Now, what did you think of this reintroduction to Jane Foster?
No, I thought it was great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought that having her, I was wondering how they were going to introduce that the cancer story from the books into the film, and this was a perfect transition. The way they did it was perfect. In my opinion, it's perfect.
Yeah, that's one of the worries I had going into it, because when they told that story in the comics, she was already a very well-rounded three-dimensional character, whereas here she hasn't been seen for years. It's like, I don't know, but I thought this scene was handled kind of well.
Yep.
And so then we cut back to Thor and Korg and the goats, and they're on this, again, I don't know the name of the planet, but they're in like what looks like almost the Himalayas in terms of the landscape, and they see that majestic beast that's lying dead, and Korg asks, who's that? And I can't remember the name of the god, but Thor's like, he's the nicest god you've ever met. And Thor's clearly shook by this, and he sees down below the bodies on the battlefield. He rushes down there and sees Lady Sif. She's got her arm cut off, and she has this thing where she's like, I'd rather die. I'll go to Valhalla. And he's like, you can't go to Valhalla if you die after the battle. Something Lady Sif would know. And I thought it was an awkward place to have humor, because this is his reunion with Sif. He hasn't seen her in a long time. And
this whole sequence right here is awkward. There's awkward humor in it.
Yeah, and she tells him that, the Gore the God Butcher came, and he's coming for Asgard next. And he kind of freaks out, and he's like, well, we're going to get you home. And he picks her up, and they all take off with Stormbreaker.
Before that, there's another awkward piece of humor so he's laying there, and he's explaining how she can't go to Valhalla unless she dies in battle. And then he says, right out of the blue, he says, your arm might be in Valhalla, which is funny. I giggled. I thought it was funny in the theater, but thinking about the scene afterwards is like, man, this is a one of his closest warrior friends, and I think on and off lover at times. And that's how you're going to jokingly talk about things with her.
Well, he sort of did the same thing when Korg was telling the story in the beginning, and how he mentions, slapdashedly the Warriors 3 and how they all, rather than how they all died, and he only shows images of them dying and no more respect paid to them, who've sort of been railroaded for all the Thor movies anyway.
Totally.
So when she says he's going for Asgard, we cut back to Asgard at night, and you have this gorgeous shot of Gore creeping up over the grassy knoll with the moon shining on him, and that illuminates his robes, and his piercing yellow eyes, and he takes the Necro sword, plunges it into the ground, and you see these shadows just coming out and starting to spread through the village, and they become these monsters. And Valkyrie shows up, and all the other Vikings soldiers show up, and they start fighting. Thor suddenly arrives and insists that Lady Sif be sent to the infirmary. And during the fighting, he notices something zooming around. He's like, "Is that Mjolnir?" And you're kind of watching it, and eventually he does see that it is Mjolnir. Reaches out to grab it. Like this little silly reunion, because like Korg did the whole psych therapy thing about the relationship that he had with the hammer in the previous film. Yeah. And this begins a long-running joke throughout the film. And so the hammer flies right past him into Jane's hands. And he's like, Jane? And he sees her as the mighty Thor. And they kind of do this almost like a freeze frame type thing where all the audio and the images of the battle tunes out as we go into another flashback narrated by Korg showing what happened to the Thor and Jane relationship, fleshing that out a lot better. And at one point, Thor, without even thinking about it, enchants Mjolnir to protect Jane should the time ever come, in much the same way that Odin enchanted Mjolnir to only be wielded by those, worthy of Thor. But Thor didn't realize that he did this, apparently, and eventually it gets to the point where she has to write Thor a breakup note because he's never around. And you have weird jokes in there, too, like, oh, sorry, I can't be with you. We've got a call, and it says Nick Fury, and things like that. So what'd you think of this whole reunion montage thing?
I thought it was good. It actually played out in theater way better than it did in the trailers. The trailers were weird.
Yeah.
In this particular scene. So yeah, I thought it was handled well. I like the reunion was cool. Basically, he sees her as Lady Thor or the Mighty Thor, and and all of a sudden, out he buffs up his all his armor, so he brightens it up. So that's the way we get all this bright armor and the big head shield and everything. It's because he's jealous, basically.
Yeah.
Like, dude, she looks great. All right, I gotta step up my game. So I thought that was pretty funny. I did like the flashback was great because I thought it filled in a lot of gaps that we never got with what happened with their relationship, which I thought that was cool. So that flashback worked. There was some funny stuff in there and some heartwarming stuff in there. So that was cool, and it was short. It didn't take up a lot of time.
Yeah. So then they finish their staring contest at each other, and they resume the battle. And Thor sees Gore, and Gore's kind of walking the streets, and Gore's kind of surprised to see two Thors and Valkyrie and all that. So he starts fighting. So Thor tries to fight him, but every time he takes a swing at him, Gore just vanishes into the shadows, like he's teleporting or something. Eventually, Gore, even despite being this emaciated guy, just grabs Thor and slams him against a car. Yeah. Eventually, grabs him by the throat and holds him at the mercy of the Necrosword. And Thor's like, "Oh, the Necrosword! I haven't seen that for thousands of years." And Gore's like, "Oh, you're gonna know pain. You're gonna know anything like pain," and puts it towards his neck. And Thor's like, "Pain is something invented by weaklings." And he's like, "Ah!" And it's starting to hit him. He puts him out of the way. And Gore, realizing that he's outmatched with this extra Thor, takes off to the hillside, at which point they're thinking they're about to get their head on the battle until the parents come out and say they're taking the children, which really took me by surprise.
Yeah, so all of the shadow monsters kind of stopped the battle and went to go grab the kids.
Yeah, and they're grabbing the kids and taking them away, and they take them back up to this like living cage on the grassy knoll, and it reminded me of the living cages on the backs of the big beetles from the Dark Crystal.
That's right. Yeah.
And that's the first thing I thought of, and they're loading them in these cages, and it's so creepy looking the way it's moving in the dark, and both Jane and Thor leap up with Mjolnir and Stormbreaker and just slam it down to try and stop the cage, but it disappears into the Shadow Realm. And one neat trick we also got to see Jane do is that because Mjolnir still has all the cracks in it, she can actually split them all apart like a boomerang or darts.
Visual missile.
Like Yondu magic dart and just send them all around, which is kind of cool. So
I thought that was cool too.
Yeah, so they disappear into the shadows, and I was like, oh man, like that was just really dark. I was like, yes.
Damn.
Yeah, you like that sequence?
Yeah. So I loved all of that. And most of these sequences I do like. There's little things inside of them that are just like, hey, that's kind of weird.
Yeah.
Why did you do that? But for the most part, the first act is pretty well done.
Yeah. So then Thor, Jane's like, how long has it been, Thor? And he's like, like 2-3 years. And he's like, 8 years, 3 months, 7 days. And they kind of have a back and forth on whose fault it was that the breakup happens. He's like, well, Thor, I wouldn't have had to write the note if you were there. And he's like, oh yeah, I guess you're kind of right about that. And they go inside, and Korg already made the mistake in narrating the whole backstory, calling her Jane Fonda the first time.
Yeah, right.
And this time, when they're all gathered in the town center, panicking about what they're going to do to get the kids, Thor is just distracted, staring at Jane holding Mjolnir, and Korg's like, the old ex-girlfriend, Jodie Foster. And he's like, no, Jane Foster. And then Thor suddenly picks up his hand. He starts doing this, wiggling it, trying to reach Mjolnir. And I didn't realize that Stormbreaker is somewhat sentient, because Stormbreaker suddenly creeps into the room, and Thor's hand. He's like, oh, there you are. I was trying to call you. And the distress.
So that basically right there sets up a running thing, or I don't know what you want to call it.
The running gag.
Running gag through the entire movie. Basically, it's a love triangle between Thor, Stormbreaker, and Mjolnir. So
yeah,
and it's funny the way it plays out. I think they dip into that well maybe once or two times too many.
Yeah,
but there's a couple of times where it's really funny. This particular scene, and then one other where it's really funny.
So then the discussions are getting heated. People are starting to shove each other, and then Thor speaks up really loudly, and he's trying to give this rousing speech about how we got to stay together in these times and not fight each other. And you hear this squeaking sound in the background. It's like, what's going on? And he finally stops. He's like, Meek, I need you to stop. Can you stop doing that for a second? As he's writing all this stuff on the board. Again, you don't need that there. It's like he's trying to give this rousing speech to be Thor. It's like, we don't need that at the time. And Valkyrie, you could tell, by the way, has also been very bored up to this point from just being, administrative work. She's kind of on board with doing something, and they're trying to figure out what they're going to do. And all of a sudden, Thor kind of feels a little weird. He's like, "What's going on?" And Jane and Falcon are like, "What's going on?" And then you see suddenly the disembodied head of Astrid, the son of Heimdall, who has his golden eyes, and it's clear he hasn't mastered his powers yet. And Thor calls him Astrid. And this is another moment of what I thought was really inappropriate humor, where Astrid gets in a back and forth with Thor. He's like, "No, my name's Axel now." Yeah. And he's like, "No, I'm going to call," and Thor's like, "I'm going to call you by the name of
band on Earth.
Like, your father saved me enough. I'm going to call you by the name, the Greek name he bestowed upon you. You are, or the Norwegian name, you are Astrid." "No, I'm Axel." And I'm thinking, you've just been kidnapped by an emaciated goblin demon with an army of shadow demons, and you're going to fuss about what Thor's calling? Again, it doesn't work. So Thor tells him how to control his powers. He says, close your eyes, deep breaths, focus. And Thor is able to teleport inside the cage, and he demonstrates that, "Look, sorry guys, I'm not really here." And he's like transparent. And the kids are all in the cage, all played actually by Christian Bale's kids, Taika Waititi's kids, Natalie Portman's kids. And they're all like panicking, they don't know what to do. And he's like, "No, you're some of the bravest Asgardians. You're braver than me." They're like, "Really?" And he's like, "Yeah." And tells them to stay calm. And they're forming a plan. They're going to come get him. So he snaps out of it. And he's like, "They're in the shadow realm." And Valkyrie's like, "How do you know that?" And he says, "Well, because I recognize it. The darkness. They're definitely in the shadow realm." And he's like, "Don't worry, I'm gonna get him. I'll be right back." And Valkyrie's like, "Wait!" Then he just channels Stormbreaker and just rips up through the ceiling of the town center. And for reasons that aren't clear, he just falls out of the sky and hits this temple outside. And Jane's like, "Oh, whatever, I'll do it." And I can't remember what she says. She says some type of catchphrase, takes off through the hole in the ceiling, but then she comes back down voluntarily. She's like, "I don't really know where that is." Right. And so they're like, "Okay, we have to control Stormbreaker, guide it somehow." So they go to one of the Viking boats and they rip out all the tourist seats and they lash the goats to the front of the boat and they put Stormbreaker and strap it on in the front. And then Thor's going to give this rousing speech and he tells everybody that, "Don't worry, we're going to go to Omnipotent City. We're going to recruit an army of gods and bring back the kids and all that." And he's like, "Yes, and then we'll feast. Not on the children, though. That would be very bad. We don't do that anymore. Those were shameful times, dark times." And I thought, oh my God, that laugh. That's probably the biggest laugh in the movie. And then they take off with the goats in the boat.
So when we're in New Asgard, there's one thing. So it's a tourist trap now, right? And there's an ice cream shop.
Yeah.
That's named Infinity Cones. I thought was brilliant.
Oh, there was another
out loud verbally said Infinity Cones in the theater. I started laughing. I don't know.
There was another joke I forgot too. When they're all deciding what they're going to do about the kids, Matt Damon and Luke Hemsworth are there, and he's like, and Matt's like, "People need entertainment in times like this. Here, I got it. Will be an opening shot at night on the sleeping children of Asgard," and they walk off to start writing their new play script. Which is like, okay, that's funny, and just seeing all the, like you mentioned, the weirdo, trinkets and stuff for the touristy trap as they take off.
The thing about that scene I thought was fine. That played fine, except for the fact that it's not clear why Thor couldn't and Stormbreaker couldn't just go to the Shadow Realm.
It's like plot armor because we need Jane and Valkyrie and the goats to come with us and Korg.
It's just kind of weird. So,
yeah. Okay. So then we cut back to the cage. And the children are in there, and Astrid is regaling them with the adventures of Thor, specifically how he decapitated Thanos. And they're like, "Oh, yeah." And then Gore just suddenly appears in the cage out of nowhere, really freaky. And he's like, "Oh, Thor, oh, you love that? He's going to come? Oh, yeah, right. I want to introduce you to my little friend here." And he brings up this demonic serpent, and the children are screaming. He's like, "Well, come on. He's really fine. I could seek him on you. Or I could do this." And I could rip its head off. He's like, and they're all like screaming, and then he just rips its head off and he's like, "What? You guys liked this a second ago, talking about how Thor decapitated Thanos." And he just throws the severed head at them, and they scream even more. And Astrid's like, "Oh, Thor will come and save us." And he's like, "I'm counting on it," which I kind of was interested in. And it's like, okay.
Bale played this scene awesomely. I thought it was
that when they filmed it, he actually scared the kids.
Yeah, dude, it was probably the scariest part of the movie.
Yeah.
I mean, not scariest, it was the creepiest part.
Yeah, for sure. And I like that because it's like, oh, he's angry. I thought we were going to see some real God butchers like, oh God, he's coming. So then we cut to Arrival on Omnipotence, which kind of is in a sense, it's like a floating city or whatever in space.
Omnipotent city, yeah.
And it looks kind of like the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, basically, all over the place. And so Korg, Thor, Jane, and Valkyrie, they get off the boat. They're walking through there, and Thor says, we're going to need disguises because you have to, invitation only to get in the main palisade room. And Thor just flicks his robe over himself. He's like, here, a disguise. And Valkyrie brings over these other blanks. He's like, what's this? She's like, actual disguises. so
they flick it over and says, they're Greek philosopher.
Greek philosopher. So they sneak into the big amphitheater, and they're seeing other gods like Quetzalcoatl, Ra, and they have a reference to the Pixar short film Bao, Bao, the god of dumplings.
Yeah.
Which is a little fourth wall breaking. It's like, okay.
I could have done like some of this. So like I said earlier, and I don't know if I really touched on this enough. This movie, kind of like Thor Ragnarok, but way more. If you don't like silly humor, if you don't like Taika Waititi's brand of silly humor, if it doesn't land for you, there's a lot you're going to cringe at with this. For me, it lands for me most of the time, about 90% of the time. But I know a lot of people that they're just, and that's what I think when people say, "Oh, this film is way too jokey." No, the jokes work. The joke, most of the jokes are funny, but you have to understand this brand of humor. It's if Faulty Towers and Monty Python and Taika Waititi, and if that kind of silly humor does not land for you, you're not gonna get it. Not that you don't get it. It's just it's not going to land for you. You're not going to enjoy it as much. So this is one of those. But the Bao, the god of dumplings, they could have left that completely out of the film.
Yeah. So they go to take their seats, and Zeus arrives, and they're all cheering on Zeus, and he comes through on this floating platform, and Jane and Valkyrie aren't too impressed at first, and Thor's like, no, shut up, we can't interrupt him during his big introduction. And I don't know if it was deliberate or not, but I didn't think his introduction with the Thunderbolt was that impressive, and maybe that was the point, because you see you see Zeus, and he's like really let himself go. It's Russell Crowe, and it's great. He's like old and fat and all this kind of stuff, and landing in, and Thor's like, oh yes, this is he's telling Jane and Valkyrie, this is my hero. I based a lot of what I do on him, because Zeus calls himself not just the god of lightning, calls himself the god of thunder.
Right.
And Jane and Valkyrie are unimpressed. They're like, let's bum rush him and take the Thunderbolt. And he's like, no, we're not going to bum rush anybody. And then Zeus overhears this. He's like, what's this? Stop! You want to come and address the court? We have other matters to discuss. So this is going to be attending the great orgy. It's like, oh, they're mentioning this in a kid's family film. Okay, so he says, no, you come down here onto the stage. So Thor starts crawling over everybody, and he's really mad. He walks because Korg, like an idiot, just points out, oh yeah, he was the one talking, man. And so he walks down onto the stage, and he's trying to tell Zeus about the God Butcher and that we need help to stop this guy. He's like, that guy's only killed a few lesser gods. It's not important. And he's like, haven't you heard what I've said? And they've kidnapped the children and all this. And he's like, no, I'm really not impressed with hearing this right now. Let's see who you really are. And he leans forward with his hands, and he's like, flick. And I guess he thought he was wearing a costume or something underneath, but he flicks so hard, all of his clothes go off. And Thor's standing there naked. And he's like, you flicked too hard, damn it. And the handmaidens like fall over, like passed out. And of course, he's got a lot of male handmaidens as well. And they're all kind of looking kind of starry-eyed as well. And then Jane's like, kind of stunned. She's like, should we help him? And Valkyrie's like, eventually. It's just kind of eating. And Korg made a joke about, he made some kind, I can't remember what the joke was. I remember it was funny though. I can't remember. Thor's dick being kind of funny. It was funny, but he's talking, and he's like, we have to, we have to stop it. We have to deal with this. And Zeus is like, well, who are you anyway? Maybe we would reveal your other disguises. And Jane and Valkyrie are like, no, and they stand up and take their costumes off really quickly before he flicks it off. And he's like, who are you? He's like, oh, you're Asgardians. Like, I thought all you guys were dead from Ragnarok. And he's like, well, what are you here? So it's like, well, didn't you hear what I said, Zeus? That, the children have been kidnapped and blah, blah, blah. The God Butcher. He's like, and he reiterates, it's not a problem. He's like, every god is in charge of their own realm. Thus, the Asgardian children being kidnapped is an Asgardian problem. That's your problem, not ours. And Thor is just totally shocked that Zeus would say this. And he's like, I never thought that my hero would be such a coward. And everybody's like, ooh. And Zeus actually comes off his throne and walks down in front of Thor. and he privately and quietly tells him that, look, I know Gore has the Necrosword. That means he can kill us, but don't worry, we're safe here because this place can't be found other than by those who already know where it is and other gods. And he gets back on the platform, and he gives Thor's clothes back, which the girls were kind of disappointed in. And he's assuring all the gods, oh, you don't have to worry about this god butcher. He'll never find eternity. And Thor's kind of like, what? And then Jane is like, what's that? And Valkyrie really perks up with that. She's like, it's an ancient being that if the first person to reach it will grant your wish, whatever your heart's desire. It's like, really? And he's like, yeah, for a guy named the God Butcher, it's 3 guesses what he's gonna wish for. So they're kind of worried about this. And Thor says, well, if you're not going to help us, let us borrow your weapon, your lightning bolt or whatever. And Zeus chides him. And he's like, you can't even call it by its proper name. I'm not going to give you my thunderbolt. And then, Korg says something, and Thor's like, Valkyrie said, can we go with our plan now? He's like, yes, fine. So they get out their weapons. Thor starts channeling the lightning, and anticipating what he's going to do, Zeus chucks thunderbolt at Korg, shattering him to pieces, seemingly killing him. Enraged by this, Thor grabs Thunderbolt, and I thought it was a jaw-dropping moment. He just spears Zeus with it and impales him out the back. Yeah. He falls over like dead as a doornail. They seize Thunderbolt. Korg is revealed to still be alive because he's like, hey, it turns out the rest of my body's dead as long as my face is still intact.
But I'll tell you what, when that first happened, I felt it. I was like, whoa, okay.
Yeah. That was intense. And so,
but, again, this is the Marvel fake death universe. So.
Yeah, so Korg whistles for the goats. They show up, and they all take off. Now, this sequence, I'm not familiar with Omnipotent City. I thought it was going to be like Mount Olympus. And the fact that there's so many different gods there. And, Zeus was trying to reassure some of them, so maybe they're not all selfish assholes.
Right.
But once he kills them, none of them try and help Thor on his mission either. So... Yeah. It was weird. I liked the humor with Zeus. I thought he was kind of funny. I'm not familiar with how
the accent that Russell Crowe does is kind of spot on. It's funny because it's weird. It's not Greek, but it's got a Greek with a little Italian in there. I don't know. It's kind of weird. But.
Right, and I thought this whole scene was laying the groundwork for where the story was going to go because Thor has now seen that the gods are not that friendly.
Right.
Because so far we agree with Gore about killing Rapu. We didn't know about the other gods he had been killing. And now we see that all the gods at Omnipotent City don't give a shit. So now they're taking off. I'm like, here we go. So the next scene, we find them on the boat. They're still flying through space. Thor's trying to reconcile with Jane, and he talks about the space dolphins, which look really cool. And he says, somebody once told me that, I want to feel shitty about you. She's like, what? He's like, better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all type thing. And she's not uneasy about it. And Valkyrie gets a microphone and puts it up to Korg's face in the boat, and he starts singing tunes to try and speed them talking back together. And suddenly Jane blurts out that she has cancer, tries to walk it back really badly, and Thor says, every other day with you is worth it, for there will be another tomorrow, another chance with you. And they finally kiss or whatever, and it's like, oh, okay, so this is great. And
so right before that, there's a really touching kind of moment that happens between Korg's face and Valkyrie, and you're kind of talking about her loss.
He's doing the same thing Thor did in Ragnarok, where he sums up how you've lost everything, and now you just have finding solace in the bottom of a bottle.
Yeah, totally being the therapist, and I thought it was a good scene.
Yeah, and I thought it was foreshadowing her death because they were repeating the same thing again. I'm like, okay, so I can see where they're going with this. That whole sequence is really nice, and suddenly they arrive in the Shadow Realm, and everything goes monochrome, which is really cool. And even Korg's like, where'd all the color go? So they land on this barren moon, and they walk forward, and they find the cage with the children is open, and the kids are missing. Like, where are they? We don't know. They start walking along further, and they come upon these tents. And they all go into the tent. Jane presses on further than the others and sees these ancient-looking texts prophesizing Stormbreaker as being the key to unlocking eternity. And it's a shame that they never dive into the origin of these texts. Where did Gore get them? When were they prophesized? Because we know that Stormbreaker was created on a whim just 5 years earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt to me like a Deus Ex Machina type moment, plot armor to go in this direction. But she races out of the tent. She's like,
it absolutely makes zero sense.
Yeah.
In the greater MCU, the eternity, the way that they explain it in this movie makes no sense.
Yeah. And she races out of the
If
cave.
whoever reaches eternity first gets their one wish granted, then why didn't Thanos try to find the eternity instead of going through all of the hell he had to go through to get?
He doesn't know how to get in. Maybe.
Well, I mean, yeah, but I mean, Valkyrie knows. It seems like everybody knows.
Well, they're aware of eternity. They just didn't have the key or know what key was required to get in the door.
Maybe they didn't know the key.
Yeah, but it still feels weird that this is coming out of nowhere. And so Jane runs up to Thor, grabs Stormbreaker, and chucks it out into space. And Thor's like, any reason you just did that? She's like, that's the key to unlocking eternity. And Gore walks in there, and this time he just uses his hands and causes all these magic vines to ensnare them all. And this is where we get to the best part. So he tells Thor about how he lost his daughter, prayed for his gods and lost. And he says, you saw for yourself what Zeus and how much of a jerk he is, and you had to kill him just so you understand me. Then he goes to Jane. He's like, oh, you're dying. I bet you pled to your gods to save you too, and they didn't. And then he gets to Valkyrie. And no joke, when they first announced Gore as the villain in January 2020, my first prediction was he is going to get to Valkyrie and exploit that, because in Ragnarok said her reason for leaving and becoming a bounty hunter was because she was sick and tired of making all these sacrifices and suffering on behalf of squabbling, bitchy gods.
Right.
And he does that. Unfortunately, despite Gore making these great points with all three of these characters, they don't exploit it at all. It goes nowhere.
Yeah.
And he just keeps taunting Thor for the axe and tortures Valkyrie and Jane with the vines. And finally, Thor gives in, summons Stormbreaker, and you have this big fight between Gore and his necromancer army with Jane, Thor, and Valkyrie. And the fight's pretty cool. The goats even get involved, and Jane falls over very weak because she's got cancer and all that, and we'll find out more specifically why in a minute. And Thor goes to help her, and Gore takes advantage of that opportunity to impale Valkyrie with Thunderbolt. And I thought she was going to die and maybe go to Valhalla, which probably would have been nice. Because in the spirit of fake death universe, Valhalla being a real place, you can always bring characters back for whatever capacity you want, especially now that they're opening the door to the multiverse and other films. So, but she lives because it's another fake out, and they managed to escape without the kids, and they take off back to New Asgard. So what did you think of this whole sequence on the moon?
So I love this sequence. And I really like the way they handled the Shadow Realm. But we were talking a little bit off air before the show started. This is why I prefer long form storytelling to movie storytelling, just in the fact that there was so much rich material to mine about Gore. So far we're about halfway through the movie, maybe 3/4, but about half. And
yeah, definitely. We're about 3/4 through the film almost.
3/4 through the film, and it's Gore the off-screen god butcher, because he doesn't butcher any gods after the very first one. So we don't see any of that. I think one would have, if even one scene of showing Gore, being ruthless, showing his motivation, killing a god, it would have done a really good setup for the rest of the film. We kind of gloss right over that, so that's why you call Gore the off-screen god butcher, because he does everything off-screen, which sucks. But I realized too that Thor movies do not focus on villains. They never have. The focus is always on Thor. So villains have never been a strong suit for these movies, and so I understand that. So it comes back to me, just wishing we had more time to and long form storytelling, tell these stories. The Gore stories, especially in God Bomb and God Butcher, those are great stories that I think just on their own would be great to tell. Yeah, on screen. Yeah, great.
Yeah,
that's kind of what my thoughts are. I thought the scenes for the movie they're giving us, not the movie we wish they gave us, but for the movie they gave us, I thought this was one of the stronger elements and the stronger scenes.
Yeah, this scene. Oh, I forgot to mention. This scene ends with, as Thor channels the Bifrost and they're taking off, he kind of gets turned upside down, holding on to Stormbreaker, and Gore just plants his feet in the ground and reaches over his arms like this to grab it, pull it as hard as he can. He ends up getting it. Yeah, and they're able to still take off back to Asgard. But
left
this
on
is where the movie falls off a cliff for me, because they did the Deus Ex Machina thing with the Eternity. Gore brought up those 3 great points with these characters. They did not exploit it at all. And like you said, up to this point, the movie has done nothing to repudiate Gore's belief that his core belief that the gods are evil and uncaring.
Right.
And granted, with the exception of Thor and Jane, but Jane's not really a god. So it's like, the movie needs to, and we realize now that he kidnapped the kids as leverage rather than wanting to do anything diabolical to them. So it's like, he really isn't living up to his name, and the movie needs to get us against him because yes, we're against him because he kidnapped the kids, but in terms of his greater philosophy, the movie's not repudiating that at all. And so they go back to Asgard. Jane is in the hospital, and the doctors say that she's on her last legs, she's probably gonna die soon. And Thor tells Jane that it's actually Mjolnir, which is draining the life force from her a lot faster and accelerating the cancer. And he says, "You're gonna stay here and don't use it again." And she's like, "Well, what about you saying I could use it for better tomorrow?" He's like, "Well, that was before how bad this was.
Before I wasn't gonna have any more tomorrows with you."
Yeah, and she's like, "Oh, spoken like somebody who doesn't have cancer." And Thor realizes he's not going to win this argument. He says, "I'm going to go take care of this." He kisses her goodbye. He goes outside. Valkyrie's still injured, but all right. And she's going to stay behind as well. She's like, "You know where to go to get eternity?" He's like, "Yes, I'm going to go." It's like, "Yes, yes." And he takes off with he just flies there, I guess, because he doesn't take Mjolnir and he doesn't have Stormbreaker, and he doesn't not seem to take the goats of the boat this time. I can't remember. I think he just flew away.
Yeah.
So then we cut to this temple, which I don't know if it's on a planet or if it's in space or what, but you see Gore leading all the children who are willfully walking behind him, almost like he's some Pied Piper, some weird type of creature. And he gets up to the gate, and we see the classic image of like the world tree, and Gore firmly plants Stormbreaker down and gets all the vines to hold it in place and starts to open the portal. And it's got to be slow and take a while. Kids are panicking, and all of a sudden one of the stone heads from the statues breaks off. Thor catches it. There's all the kids back there, and he tells them, "Today you were going to be the bravest Asgardian warriors of all time, but we can't fight." And he said, "Grab these other weapons." And for some reason, there's like random weapons landing around, so they just pick these things up. And some kids are like, "But I'm not Asgardian. I'm like a wolf or whatever, and I'm not this and that." I thought this would have been a good opportunity for Thor to bring up the point that Asgard's not a place; it's a people, or also a culture like that. But he doesn't. He just says that, "Oh, come on, you guys are fine." He's like, "The army's right behind me, aren't they?" Because Gore has channeled the Necromancer army again. And then he decides this one thing he's got left to do. So he whispers his own enchantment, and he says, "Let all of these mighty Asgardian children, for however limited, for a limited time only, due to the powers of Thor." And it's neat that as the gold lightning is spreading through all of them, it does so and illuminates the world tree, which is kind of neat from the Norwegian myth.
Very cool.
And then you have like all the kids fighting the demons and.
So I love this fight scene with the kids.
Yeah.
I don't love the fact that all of a sudden now Thor has this power. Like, where did this power come from? That he could, because why didn't he just give this power to everybody who was assembled against Thanos? So is this something that he learned while meditating?
Right.
After that, I don't know.
The other Asgardian warriors in the village when Gore was trying to take the kids, it's just
like if he could just give, however temporary Thor, God of Thunder powers to other people. Why are we only seeing it right now?
Right.
So that kind of took me back. I'm like, that's all right. Hopefully they'll explain that, but they don't. So maybe down the road they will.
Yeah. So then Thor and Gore get in a fight, and Gore gets the upper hand rather quickly. And as he's about to kill Thor with the Necrosword, it seems every time Gore strikes a blow against Thor, Jane is kind of feeling it and sensing it in her hospital bed. Yeah. And of course, just like Captain America showing up with the hammer in Endgame, the hammer just shows up with Jane, and she just knocks his ass out, and tells Thor to go get Stormbreaker. And you have another awkward bit of humor where Thor's trying to reason with Stormbreaker. "Come on, Stormbreaker, what are you doing? Stop this madness," kind of thing. And she's fighting Gore, and he's like, "Oh, you know what you're trying to do here, Lady Thor." And she's like, "First, if you're going to call me by my name, it's the Mighty Thor or Dr. Jane Foster, PhD. And she slams the lightning down some more, and she's like, "Eat my hammer," and brings it down on him even harder. Yeah. Thor eventually gets Stormbreaker and locks Gore into a position to allow Jane to shatter the Necrosword with Mjolnir, which shatters Mjolnir as well. But much like Mjolnir can reassemble itself, the Necrosword starts doing that too, prompting, Thor to break the sword again. And so the sword is broken again, permanently this time. Gore loses his powers. The necromancer army disappears. He loses all of the curse that he's been cursed with, which is another thing I actually like that they don't beat you over the head with, is that, the parallel that the more Gore uses the necrosword, the more he's dying from it, much like the more Jane uses Mjolnir, the more she's dying from it. They're letting us be smart enough to piece those parallels together, which is nice.
Before we move on, I do like to. There was a point in that battle right there where the necrosword's in pieces, Mjolnir's in pieces, and as Mjolnir comes back together, it captures some of the necrosword's pieces in encapsulating it inside of it. But it just doesn't. It doesn't have enough juice to hold it together, and eventually the pieces of the sword come out and start to reassemble the sword. I thought that was a really good part, a really good scene.
And then so Thor's cradling Jane, and we realize that we didn't notice before is that the doorway is open, and like this bright white doorway, and Gore is starting to stumble through it, and Jane's like, Thor, you have to stop him. And when he steps through the portal, Thor doesn't follow him, but it's almost like all three of them are transported to what basically looks like Soul World, except, with shallow water, except instead of dusk, it's broad in middle of the afternoon type light with cloud, kind of like the Pixar logo with the clouds and all that. And then Gore...
At this point, as an audience member, you're sitting there thinking, well, shit, what did Thor didn't do anything here. He didn't win. Yeah. Everything he tried to stop, he didn't stop. He couldn't stop.
Yeah, so Gore is stumbling his way towards a very comics accurate version of Eternity,
which looks
like the darkest of nights and galaxies and nebulas and all of that outlined.
It looked great.
And Thor implores Gore to stop, saying, "Come on, Gore, revenge and death isn't going to change anything. You don't really want that." And he's like, and Gore turns back and looks at him. He's like, "Really? Tell me, what do I want?" And he says, "You want love, and isn't love something we all want at the end of the day?" And then Thor kind of turns his back on him again, and Gore's like, "How dare you turn your back on me?" And Thor says, "Gore, I'm done with this." It's like, why would I spend? Because he knows that Jane is dying. Yeah. She's done for her. And he's like, why would I spend her last? He didn't say her last moment. He said, why should I spend my last moments fighting you when you've got there, you've won? And he says, go make your wish. And Gore's kind of taken aback by this, and he's watching. And he sees the way Thor is cradling Jane, and he has a flashback to the way he's cradling his daughter. And for a second, I thought he was going to wish Jane back or something, because he could see that there was a line that they repeated a lot in the trailer that's not in the movie, when he says, "You're not like all the other gods I've killed. You have something to fight for. You're different," which I thought would have been a nice idea to bring back here. And in a way, it kind of does, because instead of wishing to bring, he says,
you can see the contemplation on Gore's face. Because what he's seen of Thor all the way through, up until right then, when he said he chooses to spend his last moments with Jane instead of fighting Gore, changes his perspective of gods. So basically, not all gods are complete assholes, because of basically in this movie, instead of showing, or telling or fighting or you know what I mean, or beating your foe with a hammer or the axe, Thor beat him with just the way he with his what do you want to call it,
his heart,
with his heart and his outlook on life,
right?
Which I thought was kind of a beautiful way to
and I like especially that Gore doesn't say what he's going to do. He sees that and he says, what kind of father would I be? Because I'm not going to be here. I'll be gone, because he knows he's dying as well. Because again, they're smart, and they trust the audience is smart enough to know what Gore is thinking. And Jane turns to him and says she won't be alone. And she looks to Thor, and he kind of understands it. So Gore turns to Eternity, and you don't hear him make the wish, but the wish happens. And Love, which I didn't catch was her actual name, she steps forward, played by Chris Hemsworth, his actual daughter, actually.
That's right. His two twin boys are in the film as well.
Yeah, as his younger selves in the earlier flashback. So she steps forward, and Gore just has a total collapse meltdown thing and embraces her. He says, "I've missed you so much. You have no idea how much I've missed you." And as he turns to Thor, and he asks him to watch over her for him, and as he does this, Jane dies and turns into the gold particles like Odin did, and disappears into the sky. And then Gore kind of silently dies, and Thor's just left there looking at Love. not sure what to make of it. And then we cut to black. And so I like this whole climax in terms of the themes and the points they're making and what you were making and all of that. It just felt a bit unearned because of how rushed it felt like, because to me, the movie feels like it's really about to take off when they got to the Shadow Realm the first time. It's like we got through the exposition and found out the other gods aren't going to help. Now the adventure begins, and all of a sudden we're at the climax. And it just, like the way Gore went through that doorway and got there, it feels like the movie wants you to feel you've been on this epic journey with him. Like you mentioned, long-form television, or like the Thanos story going over multiple movies. And I didn't feel that with all. So even though
I didn't either. And that's why I think at even one scene of Gore showing his motivation in killing a god on screen would have helped that.
Right, because Gore in the comic,
even that one scene would have helped inform that ending and made me feel more.
Right, because the character in the comics is very visceral, and you can't just narrate that or talk about that like they do in the montages in the beginning. You have to see that and feel it, and it just wasn't there. And again, they didn't really reject Gore's opinion on the majority of the gods in general, as we'll see with the post-credit scenes. But so then we cut back to Earth, and we see a giant statue to Jane Foster, the mighty Thor, and Korg is narrating again. We see that Lady Sif and Valkyrie have made a full recovery. They're teaching the kids much needed self-defense lessons, and that Thor is now raising Love as his own, and she calls him Uncle Thor. And you have the typical spats back and forth that you'd expect between a toddler and their father,
which I thought was really good.
Yeah, and that was really good. And and they open the door, and I guess they were in a spaceship or ship or something. They open the door, and it opens like a ramp, and you see a bunch of aliens about to attack this really primitive civilization on the beach. And he says, we're going to do, you see what's going on down there? She's like, yes, the aliens, we have to help these people. And he's like, yes, because what are the gods for? She says, to help people. It's like, yes, that's what gods do. It's our duty to do this and to help people and defend them. And they run forward, and Thor's got Mjolnir back. She's got Stormbreaker. Right. And Korg says, they'd be known by many names in overtime, but instead they're just known as Love and Thunder. And that's when the end credits roll.
And that's because I didn't realize her name, the little girl's name was Love. So
because that's another thing that happened when Thor told Gore, he's like, Thor, you don't really want death and destruction. You want love. We all want that. Thor is just referring to love in general. He doesn't know that Gore's daughter's name is actually Love.
Right.
And that's the connection that Gore makes. And so when I realized that, it's like, oh, that's what's going on here. Okay. Which I thought
that was a great ending. I thought the ending was great. The movie was awesome.
I thought the ending was great. Even though I didn't feel as much as I should have because of the things we mentioned earlier, which is really frustrating. But then we get to the post-credit scenes. The first is Zeus is revealed to be alive because fake death, whatever. I mean, it is Zeus, so I guess he's Zeus.
Yeah, right.
So, and I forgot, there was a joke earlier where when he had Thor tied up, he was taunting him by saying, "Oh, what is thunder but the sound of lightning?" Which is that's a really that was a great line. But Zeus is being nursed back to health by his maidens, and it's almost like he's agreed with Gore and Thor that the god, our subjects don't really worship us anymore. They don't ask us for rain or anything like that. And he says, "Go forth, my son, and remind everyone why we gods should be feared." And then it cuts to Hercules with his big weapon, and I'm like, "Oh, you're positing Hercules as a villain? That's interesting." Because in the comics, he's said to be a Marvel hero. Then again, the same was said of Zeus. So once again, the movie is validating Gore's opinion on the majority, at least the top tier gods in the universe.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if they didn't, they didn't play more of that in the movie because it's actually true.
Well, that's how the comic ends. Is that Gore? The last thing he tells Thor is that you're like the god of Gore had to become the god of hypocrisy in order to use the god bomb.
Right.
He tells Thor, you really don't care as much either. And that's kind of the tragic ending of that, because it took Thor having to get alternate versions of himself and Jane Foster trying to stop him. And it is a tragic loss for him as Jane goes on, and he doesn't. And this, I like, they flipped it around. It's actually Jane who doesn't make it. And I thought, wow, that's a nice how they subverted that expectation, and that it's actually now Thor raised. And I should mention that Love is now imbued with the powers of eternity, and it's not entirely clear what those powers will fully entail, because they didn't really say, other than wishing, what the god of eternity can do.
We have no idea.
And she shoots like a little lightning bolt out of her eye or something. And so then we get to the post-credit scene, which is Jane Foster beside herself, being walking along this little white carpet, looking at the mountains, which looks similar to the mountains of Asgard from Ragnarok, where they're all hiding. And Heimdall's there to greet her. He thanks her for saving his son, and he says, "Jane Foster, welcome to Valhalla."
Yeah.
And it's like, that is great. And she's like, "Oh wow!" Like she can't believe it. She's gotten into Valhalla. And that's the end of the movie. So my problem here is, like I said, I was on board with most of the plotting of it up until they got to the realm there, because Gore doesn't live up to his name. They don't do enough to reject what he's doing. I thought the whole eternity thing felt like a real cop-out, easy thing. Like Gore really strives hard to achieve what he's trying to achieve in the original story. Whereas here, it's like, oh, all I have to do is go. It's like, well, wait a minute. If you've had these papers and knew all you needed was Stormbreaker, you've got the Necrosword. Why are you going around manually killing gods if you could have just gone to get Stormbreaker and just go there, immediately?
On the list.
Right. It's like, what's that about? And
that's weird.
And then the fact that he didn't exploit, like with Valkyrie, so I thought if anybody, Valkyrie would have told him where to find Omnipotent City, because I assumed that the twist was going to be that, oh, the papers aren't real. He just did that to try and get them to get Stormbreaker out of there so he can increase his odds of winning, and that what he really wanted with kidnapping the children was Valkyrie, because she's the king of Asgard and rules it. Of course, he would have been smart enough to know they would have tried to, recruit gods to help, and since he knows that, oh, the gods don't give a shit, they aren't coming, and that what he really wanted all along, I thought, was going to be how to get into Omnipotent City so he can enslave all these guys for the God Bomb project,
Right.
Like, and they would allude to it that way. But this eternity thing, it shortens the story dramatically, because excluding the credits and the trailers, the movie itself is only an hour 48 minutes, so it's pretty short.
Yeah.
So you easily could have added a storyline, go with the God Bomb story, which would let you flesh out the Gore character more, realize just how much hope is lost for Thor, how much he can't really get to this. So that way, when he finally does have to go to the Gate of Eternity at the end of it, you feel like it's earned. Like, to me, it didn't feel earned at all, even though it's hitting all of the right story beats.
Hardly any of the God Bomb storyline. So I wonder if they're actually saving that. They'll do a version of it, even though Gore's gone. If they're going to do a version of God Bomb in future films.
Or maybe they'll resurrect Gore to help him stop Hercules and Zeus and all those.
Right. In 5 Thor. Because so after Heimdall welcomes Jane to Valhalla, it does say Thor will return. So we're getting another Thor movie. Obviously, this one is the highest grossing opening weekend for a Thor movie.
Yeah.
So they're trucking along making money.
I like also what Christian Bale did with the character. He was really good.
I thought so too. And I've heard a lot of people say, not a lot of people, but I've heard the criticism. Several people say that Christian Bale's in a different movie. I'm like, no, he's not. He's in this movie. This movie just happens to have 2 different tones. When you're with the God Butcher, it's one tone, and when you're with Thor and the gang, it's another tone. It's kind of bifurcated in that way, which is fine because they set it up from the beginning to be that way. But I didn't feel like he was in something.
He jokes around and stuff every once in a while too, like he does with the kids. It's just really creepy, But I just feel that if you're not going to dive into the visceralness of the Gore storyline, you're not going to really show all that stuff he had to go through to get there, then pick any C or D level villain who you could easily give just as compelling a reason to go to the gates of eternity and ask for whatever he wants to ask to tell that story. Because I felt that they kind of just used Gore as a plot device.
Yeah, it's a bummer because, well, we'll see where they're going to go. We'll see where we're going to go.
I did like what they did with Jane and Thor. I like that.
In fact, the chemistry was so much better than had been previously, which obviously they worked on. But it was absolutely there. It felt natural and good. It was great to see her back. I thought the movie worked on a lot of levels. There's just some things like that. I mean, I wish it would have, get a little deeper in the Gore storyline.
And I wish the movie was
why he's doing what he's doing.
The pace was so quick. Again, it feels like we're about to start the adventure. Now that we've established that that the gods aren't going to help us.
Yeah.
That he's got Stormbreaker, we're in trouble. It's like, okay, here's where the big adventure is about to begin, because it didn't even feel like it had been almost an hour and a half into the film at that point.
So another criticism has been pacing, and I'm like, I didn't find the movie to have very bad pacing.
No, it's paced very well for what it is.
Fine. But then again, fandom does this. I think a lot of people confuse cutting in and out of scenes with pacing, and that's not exactly pacing. So I think they're conflating a couple of different things when they say, "Oh, it had bad pacing."
Yeah, I just feel almost like, I mean, there is a second act in the movie where they go to Omnipotent City and then go to the Shadow Realm, but it doesn't feel like the second act. It feels almost like, okay, this is the plan they laid out from the beginning, which seemed pretty simple. We're going to go here and ask a favor.
Right.
And yes, they're challenged, but they escape from Zeus so easily and then decently get away from Gore. It's almost like, okay, it just feels like the movie ends so quickly. We're suddenly at the climax. And the fact that they don't explore, like where do you get these papers? What's the lore behind this? And they don't dive into any of that.
Right over that.
Right, they just skip right over it because it's like it's plot armor.
Yeah,
and I don't like.
I hate. I usually hate when people use that term because usually they don't use it correctly and they learned it. They learned this new word and so they're running around the internet calling everything Mary Sue and plot armor and.
But I think this fits the definition of plot armor.
But it definitely has plot armor.
Yeah, so there's that, and then so yeah, I just wish that, especially when you given how great Christian Bale is, if you're not going to let him really get into the meat of that role of Gore and how epic that role is, which you easily could have done, then just again pick a different character, make like a like you said, the Thor movie.
Absolutely done that. Like I said, we get all we can do is review and critique what they gave us. This is the story they gave us. I wish they would have done other things. They just didn't. They could have easily used a like you said, another minor villain to fill this in, but we don't know where it's going. Maybe Bale will be or Gore will be resurrected to help in a God bomb situation in the next film. I don't know. Who knows?
I don't think so because, like you mentioned, that ending hits all those right beats for the end of a new twist on the end of the Gore arc that you can't really, can't really redo it. It's like unless you made an unrelated spin-off film for, and they won't do it. I think it's just Taika.
I thought Bale was used. I thought he was awesome in the scenes he was in. Like I said, one more scene of him killing a god on screen would have been awesome, but for what they gave us, it is kind of what it is. So let's do two things. Well, let's do a couple of things real quick before we go to the chat. Let's rate the film, and then let's list it in our top Thor movies, and then our top all around MCU, like kind of where.
I also want to compare.
You don't have to put it in a with the MCU's like top MCU, middle MCU, lower MCU kind of thing.
Yeah. Another thing I would do is comparing it against Ragnarok. I feel that Taika in a sense did the same thing there because the Ragnarok story again in the comics and the Hela story, that could have been an excellent dramatic Thor movie, and it just wasn't. It's like he wanted to tell a comedy on Sakaar, and clearly they threw away whatever they were building up with Loki on the throne, and the Hela story is really irrelevant because she's not a part of Sakaar at all, which takes up the lion's share of the runtime. And so when you get back there, it's like I didn't really care about anything she was doing, and it's like he just wanted to have fun and do all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Who cares about the story? And it's like I kind of feel he did the same thing here. But Ragnarok, I think, was more enjoyable on the whole, despite that I found being a bit disappointing as well.
I like Ragnarok a lot better than this. Not a lot better, but it's a better movie. I thought he did a better balancing the silly with the serious. Ragnarok's pretty dark. There's some dark elements in this movie as well. But as there it was more, I want to say it was a little more 50-50. This is more like 80-20. In the silly side, right?
Yeah.
So on the whole, I would probably rate. I'll rate this movie. I give this like a 6.5 out of 10.
I'd probably give it 5.5 or 6 because it just felt at times too flat. Like the first half, I was on board with, except for the few complaints I had along the way, and then it feels a bit flat. And even though obviously they can't have Loki in the movie, I did definitely feel his presence missed.
Really?
He does a lot more into Ragnarok by having that, because that great dynamic between those two characters, especially how he always egged him on about Jane, and that it's like, and I like that little tribute where Thor has the tattoo of Loki on his back.
That is cool. That was cool.
That was cool.
What it said? It said R.I.P. Loki, and then something like #1 brother or something underneath.
Yeah, something like that underneath.
That was funny. All right, so so we're pretty close to the same.
Yeah.
6.5, 5.
Yeah, 5.5, probably a 6. I gotta give it like a 6. I'll give it a 6.
Yeah, that's about the same.
Indeed.
In terms of Thor movies, how would you rank the Thor movies?
All right, so I think Ragnarok was the most enjoyable with replay value, even though again I had a lot of problems with the story, but it's still enjoyable for what it is. Second place, I would put the first Thor film. Third place, Love and Thunder, and the fourth would be The Dark World.
Wow, that's exactly how I have it. Okay, great.
Oh,
So yeah, that's my order. I'll have to watch Love and Thunder at least a couple more times before that's definitive. Because Thor 1, I really do like. And
it
sometimes
took a while for that. That one grew on me after a while because I had not seen that movie when I first saw Avengers.
Yeah.
I can't remember when I first saw it, and at first I kind of I didn't care for this dual storyline thing, and it's like I see you're doing the whole that Shakespeare story. Why is the name escaping me right now? Hamlet. You're doing that whole Hamlet story, and then the end with the big giant rot's a little weird, and I could tell Braun is trying to bring the Shakespeare, and some of it didn't land as well, probably because I wasn't as impressed with Hemsworth's performance in that movie, acting wise. But I still that one kind of grew on me a bit.
Yeah. So so we're the same there. In terms of overall MCU, where does this land? Top, middle, lower?
Mid to lower middle.
So that's okay. That's the same with me. It's not the lowest. It's not in that low category, but it's right there at the bottom of the mid.
Yeah, it's right there at the bottom of the middle.
Yeah. All right, cool. Let's go. You want to take some chats?
Yes.
Let's talk to the peeps. See what we got. All right, where we got? Let's get it back everywhere. Cam. Hi, Stephen, Catherine. Good to see you both. Hi, Cam.
Cam.
Bunyan Snipe saying hi.
Hey.
Here, Kat, you can read Terrier.
Terrier says, the opening in the desert made me think of the opening of Star Trek V.
Yeah. Little back and forth chatter there from everybody.
Hey.
Cam. Yeah. So we were trying to get Tony on, but it looks like he was having a technical issue. No problem. We'll do it again next time.
Yep, the Stormbreaker gags. Yeah, was
so it was cool because there's one time where the Cat was explaining where he has his hand out and he's trying to get Mjolnir, but and then Stormbreaker kind of comes over from the side. That's inside the hall they're in. They're trying to figure out what to do. There's a night one where they're outside. And
when they're on the boat,
and the Thor goes over. It's like Mjolnir's like upside down, like on a barrel, and Thor goes over and starts to talk to her, whatever, and they're talking. Then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, we're into the frame. Here comes Stormbreaker. Like what's going on?
He also shakes the boat at one point, rattles it and jerks it because he's talking to Mjolnir, and there's obviously a lot of undercurrents with the whole Mjolnir and what that actually means to Thor, which Cord comments on a couple times. It's like, okay,
I just think
it goes on that much.
They just went back to the well a couple too many times on that one, but those two in particular were really good.
Yeah.
Zeus
airwalk. Yeah, he pulls up like his tutu that he's wearing, or his tucked.
It's not really a kilt, but it looks like a skirt basically, and he lifts it up and daintily walks down the steps. I'm like, what? It's funny. That whole sequence is if you don't like the silliness of Taika Waititi, I'm sure you think that whole sequence is ridiculous. And you probably hate it. I do think that they missed an opportunity. When Zeus is doing all his stuff with the thunderbolt, showing off and doing all his flares and stuff, at the very end he should have said, "Are you not all entertained?"
Right, exactly. I thought he was going to say that.
I was waiting for it, then it didn't happen. I was like, "Oh man, okay, I get it," but oh man, that would have been great.
Yeah, I mean, that was just weird that they didn't, because you already broke the fourth wall with the god of dumplings, Bao. It's like,
right, Bao, yeah. Omnipotent City, it was another Jason Aaron creation like Gore. Yeah,
that's true.
Tim Possible Zap.
Hey, Tim.
Everybody saying hi to Tim. Apart from Loki, I don't know exactly what we're talking about there, but okay. Yeah, crosstalk. Here you go.
People will complain that the Necrosword is different to the comic version, yet ignore Stormbreaker, which is closer to the ultimate version of Mjolnir.
Right.
True.
That's true.
And then there's the question of, didn't Hela wield the Necrosword in Ragnarok?
Yeah, like what happened there?
Right.
They didn't actually. I don't think they called it the Necrosword, but it was alluded to that. At least that's what I took away from the movie, is that it was the Necrosword. So I don't know, maybe some other sword, who knows? But
because did he use the sword to resurrect the zombie Asgard army in the crypt? I can't remember. I'd have to go back and watch it again.
I have to watch it again. I'm not sure if she uses a sword to do that. I can't remember.
It is interesting that I didn't know the Necrosword was sentient in the way that it's kind of whether it's the voice of the sword or some other demon that's enchanting, and an idea that in a way they say the sword cursed Gore and sent him on this quest, but really he didn't really need the sword to curse him because he was already, pretty upset on his own, It
just fed into his anger.
Yeah. Technically, Sif and Heimdall are Vanir, not Aesir. Yeah.
Nerd.
Oh. The multiverse introduced. Oh yeah, the multiverse may introduce a more powerful God Butcher. I would hope so. I don't know if they could get Christian Bale back for it, but let's see. Great back to the movie. Oh yeah, Cam enjoyed the breakdown. Enjoyed hearing what we had to say. Reinforces that I'll wait for streaming. Appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day. Oh, thank you, Cam, for joining us.
Appreciate it. And he's saying bye there.
Yep.
Darren.
We will have Adam Warlock hunting the Guardians. Now Hercules will hunt for Thor.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, a lot of people are interpreting what Zeus told Hercules to mean that he's going to tell him to kill Thor, but he said to make the people afraid of the gods again. And so I don't know if that means he's going to try. I mean, yes, obviously Thor would become an adversary in that conflict, but I don't know if that specifically means he's going to hunt Thor down.
I'm interested to see if they're going to do kind of, like they did with Wanda, where, almost like an anti-hero arc.
Yeah.
With Hercules. So it might start out where he's like, he seems like he's on the wrong side, and,
Yeah, because after all,
he's a hero in the comics. So he's never.
After all, Zeus knows now that Thor destroyed the Necrosword, so that threat is gone.
Right.
And destroyed Gore. So even though he's probably upset, obviously, about getting impaled, it's like, hey, we don't have to hide as much more. It's gone, So maybe he won't hold as much of a grudge. It's like, yeah, you just can't come to my orgies anymore, which is something he threatened to do. If he didn't shut up, I'm going to disinvite you to my orgies and make you stay here forever.
That's another part that's awesome. They're having that back and forth. Thor's not shutting up. He's like, you're disinvited to the orgy.
And the girls kind of sigh at that because he thought about inviting him there when they saw, Now whenever I don't like something that comes out of somebody's mouth, I'm saying, you're disinvited to the orgy. Yeah.
Turgay says, yes, it's totally fine to wait this one out for Disney Plus. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you don't, I prefer seeing movies like this, big spectacles. And let's face it, these Marvel movies are big spectacle movies. I prefer to see those in the theater, but if you want to wait for Disney Plus, sure. It's your prerogative. As they say. So a little more crosstalk here. Everybody's saying hi to each other, and I think that's it.
Okay.
Yeah. So all in all, I was entertained by this movie. Like I said, I think we both kind of fall on the side of it's liked, not loved. It's kind of a middle to lower tier MCU movie. Probably about the middle of the road of the Thor movies.
I say it's okay, mostly because I was really disappointed after that really strong opening. That it just, I mean, you knew it was Taika. He's going to feed into the humor, but you could do both humor. Like a friend of ours, another friend of the channel, Ernesto, says he agrees that Thor needed somewhat of a change after his first 4 appearances in the MCU. But that doesn't mean you had to make Thor a dumbass.
So I disagree with that. I've been hearing that a lot too. That he's dumb. He's not dumb in this movie.
Well, I mean, dumb in terms of
So I
Thor
think
necessarily the
people are
character, but
conflating that too. They're conflating dumb with aloof. He's very aloof in this movie, but he's not stupid because every time there's an
no, he didn't mean so much the character.
if something's wrong, he knows what to do.
No, he didn't mean the character of Thor.
Where he understands where it is. It's not like he's an idiot.
No, he didn't mean Thor the character is dumb. That the movie as a whole has a dumber type of tone to it than.
So yeah, okay.
Like you can strike a middle of the road. Like for instance, the Iron Man movies had a ton of humor in it.
Sure.
But it still straddles that line really well between the comedy and still being invested in the story and caring about what's happening. Whereas Ragnarok and Love and Thunder, just sometimes it's like some of the gags and going back to the well and not really investing much in their other characters to the point that I don't really care about. Like again, I'm not really invested in the climax of either Ragnarok or Love and Thunder because both movies don't really spend much time developing either their villains or spending much time interacting with it to the point that it just felt a bit flat. Which is why I was disappointed because I thought
but I do, like I said, if you want to say the overall humor is dumb humor, that's fine. But people are actually saying that Thor is dumb in this movie. He's not. He absolutely knows what to do when the time comes. It's just a very aloof. I thought he was. Taika really likes that aloof Thor for some reason because he used it in Ragnarok too.
Yeah.
Bunyan says, I want to be a fly on the wall when parents are explaining orgies to their children. Yeah, the number one takeaway of kids coming out of the theater to their parents, Mom and Dad, what's an orgy?
Yeah, that's funny.
That was funny.
Marvel wants to get away with it.
I think that's it for the comments. Well, Kat, this has been fun. This was really fun. We're at about an hour and 20, a little over an hour and 20. Should we call it?
Yeah, 122. Yeah.
Awesome. So thank you everybody for coming and we'll try to do more of these reviews. Usually Scotty and Kat do these, but every once in a while I like to jump on, especially walking through a film with Kat is so much fun. And until next time, I guess, we'll say goodbye. For Catherine, I am Steve Foley, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, we will see you next time.